We're going to use 5D problems to help us to learn to write equations for word problems. So we're going to use this word problem. A train from Washington, D.C. to Chicago first stops in Pittsburgh and then in Cleveland. The distance from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh is 30 miles less than twice the distance from Pittsburgh to Cleveland. The distance from Cleveland to Chicago is 220 miles more than the distance between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. If the entire train ride is 710 miles, how far is the train ride from Cleveland to Chicago? Using the information in the problem, I started my 5D table, so I have a diagram of the train ride, which starts in Washington, ends in Chicago, and stops in Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And the entire train ride is 710 miles. So what I did, since Pittsburgh to Cleveland is the distance that we do not know anything about, and the other distances are written based on the distance from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, I chose that to be my variable, or in the case of the 5D table, it is my first guess. So that is x, and then the distance from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh is 30 miles less than twice that distance, so that's 2x minus 30, and then the distance from Cleveland to Chicago is 220 miles more, so that would be x plus 220. So what I did was I took a guess of 200, which, by the way, I am sure is not right, and I just worked it through the problem so that I could see how the math works out. So I used 200. Washington to Pittsburgh is 2x minus 30, so that's 2 times 200 minus 30. The distance from Cleveland to Chicago is x plus 220, 220 miles more. So I did 200 plus 220. And then I added all the distances together to get the total train ride. And my answer is obviously too big. But that doesn't really matter, because just working through that guess helps me figure out how to build the equation. So to build my equation, x is now going to stand for the distance from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, which I have in my diagram, but I'm going to use this to build my equation. From Washington to Pittsburgh is 2x minus 30, because it's 30 less than twice. And from Cleveland to Chicago is 220 more, so it's x plus 220. Now all three of these distances make up the entire train ride, which is 710 miles. So then I added all three of those. I put the Washington to Pittsburgh in parentheses and the Cleveland to Chicago in parentheses. I don't have to, but I did that. That way I can see exactly which one of these is. This is x is the first part of the trip, 2x minus 30 is the second part, and x plus 220 is the third part of the trip. And then the total trip is 710. So I actually built my equation off the fact that that total is 710. So this is what my initial equation looks like. So my variable x represents the distance from Pittsburgh to Cleveland. And then what I did was I took my original equation and I simplified it by combining like terms. And that gave me 4x. And then I had 220 and then a minus 30, so that gave me the 190, and the total is 710. So I solved this equation by working backwards and using opposite operations. So since it says plus 190, I subtracted, and because it says 4 times x, I divided, and I got that x equals 130. Now it's important to realize that x equals 130 is the distance from Pittsburgh to Cleveland. That actually does not answer the word problem. The actual word problem asked for the distance from Cleveland to Chicago. So x equals 130 was helpful, but it's not my final answer. So I had to take 130 and add the 220 to get my final answer of 350 miles. So that is the answer to the actual problem. So the distance from Cleveland to Chicago is 350 miles. So using a 5D table can help you build an equation, and then once you solve the equation, you have to go back and read the word problem to make sure that you are actually answering the problem. So let's sum this up. So first of all, use keywords in the problem to help you decide what your variable represents and how things are related. Work out one guess to see how the problem works, and that will help you also decide how things are related and how that translates into algebra. Your equation comes from the do and decide parts of the 5D, and then you can solve your equation using opposite operations. But make sure you reread the problem to know exactly what it's asking for before you put that in your declare sentence, because sometimes the answer to your equation is not the answer to the question. So I hope this helps you out. Let me know if you still have some questions. Thanks, and have a good day.